Hi everyone, thank you for joining me again for episode number 48 of AppScan Tuesdays. Last week we had a really interesting session, at least from my point, on a new and upcoming capability that we are adding to AppScan, the integration between AppScan CodeSweep and GitHub. It's still not live, or maybe it is. You will see more details in the description below, and I will also add a link to this video. Today, I'm having with me on the show, Mr. Al Wagner. Hi, Al.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm good. And you?
Very good, thank you.
So, Al, you're a transformation advisor, and it's a mouthful of explanation. So I want you to explain exactly what you're doing with HCL Software.
My primary role is to help organizations by reviewing existing processes and looking for opportunities to improve their DevOps pipeline, whether that be through value stream management or some type of automation, using technology to automate a particular step of the process to help them achieve their business objectives.
Which basically helps them optimize all the processes, be able to do more in less time.
Right.
Cool.
It's actually, delivering on business results. It's, the business has objectives, the engineering team supports the business in achieving those objectives. So how do we get as good as we possibly can in meeting business expectations and essentially external client expectations?
Cool. Sounds good. And of course, developers are always there to drive the business. It's not vice versa, as some developers would like to think. So thinking about the business imperatives and what the business needs, that's the right approach.
Right.
And you have a demo to show us, like in every other session that we have. What will we see in the demo?
Well, what I'm hoping to show is, leveraging the power of some of HCL Software's technologies and how we can bring them together to maybe achieve that business objective of optimizing the pipeline.
Yeah. So this sounds really interesting. Let's jump to the demo.
All right. Okay. So what we're looking at here is the main value stream view of Accelerate. And this allows the app dev manager to get a holistic view of how perhaps a potential or how perhaps a product team or a project team is executing with respect to lead time, cycle time, their build frequencies, their deploy frequencies. Is there incidents in production that they need to be concerned with? What are some of the latest security scan results? How are we doing in the uptime world? Or potentially there's an issue in the pipeline, a bottleneck, a slow spot that we want to resolve. So there's some very good information that can help the app dev manager guide the team or lead the team to improvement. When we move into the value stream, we get more detail on the work that we were talking about, the various dots that are currently in flight, from ideation to implementation, because we're trying to get better in delivering of these code changes. But really what I want to get into is this pipeline view. As we look across in HCL Accelerate, we can see we have one application, and we can see which versions of that application currently resides in the many stages en route from that commit build process through to production. And you'll see some indicators, the greens and the reds, which are telling me a level of quality. So in production, we have a fairly good level of quality. We've flagged that version 1.0 as green. We're not going to accept version 1.1 and 1.2 because of some quality criteria that has failed. The other thing that we have is this notion of smart gates. And smart gates allow us to use data that is captured during these deployment and execution of tests to make intelligent decisions. Some of these smart gates may be, a manual sign-off where an individual has to first approve a process, a deployment process, or the change control board or change approval board needs to sign off on a release. This is certainly one of the gates that can be implemented. But we also want to take it to a new level where we look at some of the automated gate capabilities. Things like, adding a rule for OneTest where we can say that all functional tests must pass. The failed count can be 0. If there's one failure, we're not going to allow the deployment into production. Another rule we may implement is with respect to AppScan. And perhaps we're going to pick a metric on static code analysis. And if the analysis shows that there's a single blocker, that we will delay or deny the ability to deploy that code change into production. So these are very powerful, where we're not relying on individuals. In some organizations that I've spoke to, sometimes people get notifications for approvals and they perhaps don't do the due diligence in checking on the different testing results to understand whether it should go or not. I hope that doesn't happen, but I've heard some horror stories where these approval requests are just signed off. So, as part of this whole notion of optimizing this pipeline, I don't want to have to kick off a deployment job and then notify the testers to run some functional tests and notify the security team to run their security scans. I want to integrate that into my deployment pipeline so that I have an automated process that is seamless. And using a tool like HCL Launch, the first step here, if I explain this process, and you'll see it in action shortly, but as I explain this process, the first thing I'm going to do is deploy my application change. And then we're going to start to apply some logic to our deployment process, and we're going to check for the environment. And if I'm deploying into the dev environment, well, maybe the first step I do as part of that check is run a static scan by triggering a capability deployed in AppScan. And following that, maybe I execute some API tests using the integration with OneTest. And when those are done, Accelerate has parser plugins where the results of these test executions can be returned back to Accelerate for reporting purposes, for trend analysis, and to help with those smart gates and making data-driven decisions. So the dev one is pretty quick, but when we get into the test environment, so the deployment process is going to run. We're going to deploy to dev. If we satisfy the criteria around static scan and some API tests, we're going to upload those results, and we're going to move into deploying into the test environment. In this case, maybe we have a different flow. Maybe we have different types of checks. So the first step, using the power of the API, I could send a request to AppScan to install the interactive application security testing monitors, which will capture more detail as I execute some functional tests, as I execute my performance tests, as I perform some dynamic scans. And when I'm done that, I can automate the deactivation of that ISAT monitor or IAST monitor, and then upload those scan results into Accelerate. So we're really getting to a place of continuous delivery that includes continuous testing, both functional performance as well as security. The other thing within Accelerate is I want to really speed up this pipeline. I have this auto promote capability. So what this is telling me is when I deploy 2.0 into my dev environment, if the dev environment deployment is successful and the tests execute and pass meeting the quality criteria, we will automatically deploy into the test environment. So let's kick this off. We're going to do a deploy. We're going to pick our version, which is Emerald version 2.0. What this is doing now is Accelerate is communicating with Launch, sending instructions that we want you to deploy version 2.0 into the dev environment. As we look at, we're deploying from our plan now, through Accelerate, we can move into the release view and drill in, and we can watch this activity in flight. So through that release plan view, I've got a link to HCL Launch, and this is our deployment process executing. The first step is we're going to deploy the application. That may be download the updates from an artifact repository. That may be we need to make a change to that file, or perhaps a properties file needs to be updated. We stop the running instance, we deploy the change, and we bring the instance back up. The next step is we check the environment. Because we're going into the dev environment, we're going to be executing our scans. And when the scan completes, we will move down to executing our API tests. And when the API test completes, we will send the results up to Accelerate.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to go back to Accelerate quickly, go back to our deployment view. And what's happening is this is all happening. This pipeline view is going to be refreshing with the latest versions that have been deployed. So here we can see that 2.0 is now deployed into the dev environment. In a quick refresh, we can see that the deployment into test is automatically clicked off or kicked off. And we're going to be moving 2.0 into our test environment. And following that same process of going into the release plan, and I can click through and watch this execution in flight. In this pass, we're doing the same steps that we would be deploying, that we used to deploy into the dev environment. Some of the parameters may change, and we can handle that through some substitutions in HCL launch. But for the most part, the best practice around this is build your deployment process for a production release, and then add logic to include some of these checks, whether that be functional checks or performance checks or security checks. And we have the ability to add that logic where we're running the right tests for the right environments, and we're doing it in an automated manner that is really decreasing the time it would take to potentially do this in some organizations. I mentioned I talk about value stream mapping and value stream management. One of the things we would look for as we try to optimize a pipeline is the elimination of these manual handoffs or the breakdown of silos. Imagine a world where on that commit, the next step is somebody's going to send a ticket over to the release engineer to say, oh, there's a new version now deploy. So now we've got one queue, and there's going to be a backlog there. And then the release engineer deploys the changes and sends a note over to the QA team, and there's going to be a backlog there. And then the QA team is going to send a note over to the security team, or maybe the release engineer sends a note to both teams. What if we got rid of all of those notes? How much time would we save in moving that application through a series of environments where we are automatically applying these checks and doing the right level of search to make sure that the functionality, the performance, and the application is secure, and then reporting that back. So the last thing we talked about as part of this deployment process, these results being sent back to Accelerate. So let's take a quick peek at that. Accelerate offers the ability to create dashboards that allow you to build out a collection of graphs that would make sense for your stakeholders. One of the things we always suffer from in optimizing the pipeline is the reporting up and bringing all this data together into a consolidated view so that we can communicate that we are getting better or there's opportunities for improvement. So if I look at a scan result on the ASOC dynamic scans, these have been parsed back from these parts of these runs, and I can see over time my vulnerability numbers are trending down. That's a positive. If I wanted to see specifics on the application scan results, I could go into the details, and I can see that the various scan levels. I can see a summary of the highs, the mediums, the lows, some infos, as well as I have a link where I can click back and browse right back into ASOC and view the actual scan details. So what's being parsed into Accelerate is kind of a summary to give you that right level of information to know, okay, we've got this many high vulnerabilities or this many mediums or this many lows or these infos, but we also provide the integration back to the source. Because that's important when we're dealing with, some people just need the high level view. Yes, we would like to see zero high vulnerabilities. Are we trending down in that way? Are we getting better? But those that need to triage are going to want to look at the actual scan details. And through Accelerate, we have that link. So it's really a powerful way of bringing all these pieces back together where, through that seamless pipeline of integrated technologies, we have the ability to, on a commit, automatically kick off a deploy. And as part of that deployment, we're going to run certain quality checks. And then if those quality checks meet a satisfactory level, we're going to automatically move that into another environment. And I could have continued on with this auto promote all the way along this whole pipeline, taking us truly to a continuous deployment model. I chose this route because most companies I talk to are still kind of continuous delivery, where we're going to have that final user acceptance test where people take a look at the application, and maybe that's the demo stage.
Yeah.
But with HCL Accelerate, Auto Promote, and Smart Gates, you could truly move to a continuous deployment model if we have the right level of quality checks implemented in our automated process. And that's what I wanted to share with the viewers is this functionality is available, it's out there, and it can really make a difference in optimizing that pipeline.
Cool. Thanks very much. Al, let's bring you back to the video.
All right.
Thanks, Al. This was a really detailed and interesting demo, I'll admit. We show how you can go all the way from just pushing the code to do all the testing, and everything is automated, which is extremely important. Developers want to know that what they check in goes out to production, and security team and quality folks want to make sure that whatever developer put in is in good quality and good security.
And the one thing I would add is it's one of the guiding principles of DevOps is accelerating that feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
So through the use of automation, we can shift the functional performance and security checks earlier in the process, accelerating that feedback loop to the developers, so we can avoid pre-production or production incidents. The sooner we catch them, the sooner we can fix them.
Yeah, and we reduce the bottleneck, and we all align to serve the business needs, which is, as you said earlier, that's the main goal here.
Absolutely.
So this is a really interesting topic, and you and I discussed about delivering something to expand on it, planning on a webinar. If we will include, Al gave me a link to the Secure DevOps newsletter. I will include it below. And if you already registered to it, great, thank you. If not, I invite you to register. We will soon send also information about this webinar that we are planning, where we will go deeper into the discussion, no demos there, but into this discussion of the value that you get from using this approach. Doesn't have to be from the HCL Software tools. There are other tools out there, but of course we wanted to show you of the capabilities that we have. Any additional words, Al?
Yeah, the one thing that I really want the webinar, and we're shaping the webinar to be about, is the people process side of the equation. That's so important. The technologies, once we understand the problems and the limitations and the feelings and have empathy for the challenges, then we can pick a technology to solve that problem. Hopefully it's HCL Software, but process and people is the hard part.
Yeah, and
technology is simple in comparison.
At the end, in many cases, we are your customers, even if you're not using our tools. So we want to make sure that our information is secured, that the quality of the product that you give us is high quality, because we want to enjoy the usage of high quality products. So as Al mentioned, the tools is one thing, practices and processes, the tools will serve them.
Exactly.
Thank you, Al. Thank you very much for coming to the show. Bye-bye.
Excellent. Have a great day.
You too.